Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. Welcome to Good Measure. My name is David and I'll be your host today. Today we have Kannan Shah, machine learning scientist leader at Amazon. He's here today with us to talk about Amazon, AI, and all things new tech. Kannan, thank you for being here with us today. Do you mind introducing yourself to those in the audience who may not be familiar with you and your work at Amazon?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me here, David. I'm super excited about the conversation. I'll give you a brief overview of my background. So I come from my academic training is in electrical engineering, signal processing, stochastic systems, detection estimation. I was I'll give kind of like a brief overview of kind of just the journey of my career, and I think that should be sufficient background.
Mhm.
So yeah, I was working on my PhD in Drexel back in like the early mid 2000s, and I kind of left my PhD early to take a really cool job offer that I got out in San Diego. So I was Drexel University is in Philadelphia. I moved out to San Diego back in 2007. That Wait, let me back up. So yeah, when I was in grad school, I was doing some work in proteomics and uh, then some work with the DoD for rupture detection in naval ships, um, and those are kind of like uh, engagements that I had like with the industry while I was in
Mhm.
grad school. My first job was in a totally different field. It was credit card fraud, bank fraud, in kind of the banking finance industry,
Mhm.
working for a company out in San Diego. Moved out here, did that for about 6 years. Moved over to CA Technologies, similar but slightly different set of application areas. This is all kind of during a time before words like data science and machine learning were like very
Mhm.
commonplace. Um, so this is like really old school
Yeah.
type of work. Um, I in 2015 I joined Amazon, and I kind of shifted over from like the banking industry to the software industry, and I joined the books organization, so Kindle and physical books,
Yeah.
and for a couple of years I did some work building models around understanding user behavior and things like how they use the Kindle app and what kind of features they find the most useful and what kind of
Mhm.
features we should invest in more. Um, then I moved over to kind of the demand part of the organization and looked at the kind of things we were doing for marketing, and getting the right books in front of the right people, some
Mhm.
personalization type of work. Still all focused in the books organization. So I've by the way, I've been in the books organization my whole tenure at Amazon. So um, that's kind of context for most of what I'll be talking about. A couple of years after that, I moved over to the indie publishing part of the books organization, and built out a science team here in the Indie Pub organization, where we build things to support independent authors and kind of like with a goal of democratizing the publishing industry. My team's charter is to basically support that process through the use of ML and science.
Mhm.
Um, the yeah, yeah, I think that's kind of like a decent high level overview of my
Yeah.
background.
That sounds awesome. And so uh, nowadays, it really seems like AI and machine learning are basically the topics that are being used in mainstream media. And so, could you explain to us what's sort of the importance of AI and ML these days, and how is it becoming all the more relevant in our lives?
Yeah. Um, So there are a lot of different ways that you can use AI and ML, right? Um, some of the stuff that you see more prominently kind of in the news, and some of the stuff that seems more exciting is like net new features that you can use to delight customers.
Mhm.
Um, right, like generative models that create content, or a lot of the computer vision type of stuff, or right. Um, but then there's a whole different way that you can use AI and ML, and more generally speaking, statistical methods like methods based on statistical learning for optimizing existing business processes. And that's kind of what my team focuses on. We have, for example, we do some work in content moderation, right?
Mhm,
We to make sure that the authors are independent authors aren't writing about stuff that we don't want in our catalog, for example, like hate speech.
mhm,
Um, so a lot of that, a lot of that moderation is done manually, but then you can use AI and ML to automate some of that. To automatically flag when submissions, when authors make submissions, we build models to kind of understand the submission, understand like models for creating deep comprehensions of the text, and then set them up to flag us when we see an author submit something that might contain hate speech
mhm,
or might contain some other kind of misinformation, or that kind of thing. So that I think in my team's world, the way we look at the value of AI and ML is really around um, adding scale and consistency to processes that are otherwise kind of expensive and like manual.
mhm. And
Automation.
so,
Yeah.
say like I'm an up and coming like author, and I'm still like I'm working on everything, and I just published a book on Amazon. How does does your team work on how the system sort of moves to help and promote the author and their writing?
Yeah, so we definitely we work in that space. It's kind of stuff that we're just starting to really look into and see what kind of things we can do to provide guidance to authors for how to market their books, how to build their business. And it's definitely within the scope of my team. But it's kind of the brainstorming phase, right?
Mhm,
um yeah, but uh, yeah,
mhm.
but we do work in
Yeah.
that.
And so I guess there's a lot of, I guess, like potential upside that we really see in these systems. And so how does your team sort of um, prevent mishaps, and how do you sort of tackle the sort of ups and downs that you might find when dealing with automated machines and learning and self-learning machines?
Okay. um let's see, let me think of a general um
Could be like
perspective.
an example or anything.
So it's really, I think it's really case by case. But the general approach is you have to build guardrails, right?
Mhm,
So you have to you set up your overall kind of system, and embed your machine learning component in your system in a way that you really understand what or you create limits around what outcomes can result from the outputs of your model. Right?
mhm,
And you have those limits as guardrails. So that's kind of like the f- the general approach to it. But I think that manifests itself in really different ways from problem to problem. um like for example, um if you're building a model to uh, read and understand a submission and make some suggestions for things like keywords or categories or something like that, right?
mhm,
If this is like a generative model that's just coming up with suggestions and spitting them out, you have to make sure that you have some moderation
mhm,
patched on top of those suggestions, that so that you don't get inappropriate suggestions, right? So, and like those moderation layers you can think of as guardrails.
mhm. And I guess as someone who's really like been involved in this AI and ML scene, like I've heard a lot of my friends, and especially like my friends' parents, talk about how they fear that their jobs certainly might be taken over by very capable machines. And so, What are your thoughts on that? And what would happen to certain groups of people? And which groups of people do you think might be the most easily affected by ML and AI in the future markets?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely a very real concern, right? Especially if you look at things like, self-driving trucks and stuff like that. I mean, there are um, human professions that are pretty directly um, targeted by some developments in AI. Um, I mean, there are of course positives and negatives, but the risk that poses to people's livelihoods, um, I mean, I don't think it can be understated. um, I don't know what's going to happen there, but I definitely agree with you on that risk being real.
Mhm.
um, I think I don't think it's new for AI. I think that concern it's more just it's always been there for any kind of technological advancement
Mhm.
throughout human history, right? So, and I think just historically, looking back, every time there's been a major advancement, there has been a major disenfranchisement. Not every time, but many times, there have been major technological advancements. There have been major kind of disenfranchisements um, of like certain industries.
Mhm.
But yeah, I don't really have an answer for I don't have a comforting answer for that, but I definitely agree with
Yeah.
the risk.
And so, as someone who's really got your own sort of like team working on this books project, and what are some of the challenges that you've encountered when using machine learning? And so, how do you sort of address a topic so advanced like that?
Um, I guess let me think how I want to interpret that question. I, if I interpret that question as like what are the key challenges like from a practical standpoint of
Yeah.
using machine learning, then I think I would say it's just well two things. One is making sure that the problem is framed in the right way, right?
Mhm.
Making sure that you're mapping the business concern or the business goal or problem or the customer problem into analytic terms and ML terms
Mhm.
in the most efficient way, because that doesn't there's more than one way of doing that, and that kind of comes with experience,
Yeah.
experience working on multiple problems over and over again, right? And then I think the next biggest kind of challenge is working with data, right? And working with real world data is it, that's 90% of the work of the effort that scientists on my team kind of like that's where they spend their time,
Mhm.
um, getting finding what data, deciding what data they want, finding the data they need, getting the data, making sure that it makes sense and cleaning it and all of that. That's really 90% of it. And then the using the algorithms, right, and choosing what kind of like the model designing and whatnot is probably just 10% of the effort, really. So
Mhm.
I think all the challenges in the data.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for those in my audience who may be sort of new to this topic or are on the high school level, how can they get more involved in this field and how can they sort of read up and learn more about ML/AI?
Yeah. Um, so so this might be kind of an old school opinion. I really think you have to start with like the fundamentals. And what that means is I wouldn't recommend like taking a course on ML or a course on AI to get started.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's really about probability theory, advanced statistics, linear algebra, and being like a really strong coder. So I would start with building that foundation, kind of um, separately and in depth in each of those areas: probability statistics, linear algebra, and kind of programming. I think if you have that down, then the rest of the field and the rest of the work and the understanding and like the ability to select and design, I mean, algorithms just kind of falls together by itself.
Yeah.
um yeah.
And well, that's it. Thank you so much. Is there anything else, any last thing that you'd like to say to the audience?
No. Thanks for the interview, David. This is pretty cool.
All right, you're welcome.